I woke up and I suddenly got it. I understood suddenly how thought was just an illusory thing. And how thought is responsible for, if not all, most of the suffering we experience. And then I suddenly felt like I was looking at these thoughts from another perspective. And I wondered, who is it that's aware that I'm thinking? And suddenly I was thrown into this expansive, amazing feeling of freedom. And that I want to take as many people with me as I possibly can, because the feeling is amazing.
If I could have a deepest wish for this world, is that this magic could return, so that maybe the grandchildren of my grandchildren could say, I have heard stories of a time when the magic was not present, but now we have remembered. Now the magic is back. Now the earth is singing again. Now the earth is singing its own song.
If I have a Bible in my hand, I say, this is not the Word of God. The Word of God brought this into being. It doesn't mean that this is not the Word of God, but these words on the page, that's not what word really means. Let me give you a couple examples before actually explaining that in Aramaic. There's over 3,750 Bibles on the market in the United States of America today. Over 20% of every Bible that's published and copywritten has to be different from any other published version. A lot of people don't know that. Which one is the inerrant Word of God? Good question. The Word of God grows your fingernails. The Word of God makes that infant in the first 20 minutes of life to be a full-grown adult at 20 years of life. It's what grows the leaves on the trees in the springtime after winter seems to have the appearance of death. Milta, that word in Aramaic, logos in the Greek. Even in Greek, it doesn't mean simply word. What it actually means is consciousness.
I think the closest way to think about God is being, period. Not a being, but being. The very ground of being itself is God. I think that's the deep, and from my point of view, that's the ground of consciousness. So the ground of conscious being is what we might call God. But the word God has always been, for example, you don't believe the same God as my God, so I'm going to fight you, or we'll have wars over, because the specific being that you call God is different from the being that I call God, and so we fight. Whereas if it's not a being, but just being, and you and I share being, then you and I are not separate, and there's no reason to fight.
Freedom is attained, realized, through the realization of what you are, of what you have always been, not what you've been taught you are, not what your parents told you you are, not even what you told yourself you are, because none of that's who you are. None of that. And everybody knows this. This is like the secret that everybody knows, but not many people want to admit. Not many people want to look inside to the looking and then disappear. And yet the great surprise is when we look inside and the illusion of ourselves disappears, even for a moment. We find that that is the greatest freedom. That is the greatest joy. That is the return to our inheritance, to being this divine light. I call it divine because it is outside of time. It's not of time.
Eternity is that dimension of here and now, which thinking in time cuts out.
This is it.
This is it.
This is my...
If you don't get it here, you won't get it anywhere. And the experience of eternity right here and now is the function of life.
I am by nature a kind of traditional mystic, that the New Age spiritual teaching, so to speak, didn't mean very much to me. My focus was on the inner experiences of the individual, the inner mystical experiences that really belong to classical Sufism. And then a strange thing happened in the spring of the year 2000. Suddenly my attention was shifted. It's like somebody turned my head from here to there, and then I saw this, what I have called this emerging consciousness of oneness, that there is something awakening in the world that hasn't been here before, and that it, in a way, it has its, you can trace it back to the mystical understanding of oneness, because oneness is a basic mystical experience. Many, many, many people have had experiences of oneness. They've woken up for a moment and, like the poet William Blake said, to see the world in a grain of sand. They have had those momentary experiences. They see that everything is one. They see the universe is one dynamic whole. But the idea that this might become part of our collective human experience, not just an individual mystical experience, which it has been traditionally in the past, the unio mystica of the mystics, that somehow the whole of humanity is taking a step to a different level of awareness. This really began to interest me. And all I can do is say there seems to be a need to prepare the ground so that if such a moment should happen, if there should be something that collectively awakens humanity, the whole of humanity, to this other reality that is so present, because it's not something abstract, it's not an ideal, it's the fact that everything is one is an ecological reality. It is a reality on many levels, that one can begin to prepare the stepping stones, so to speak, the foundations, so that if this moment of grace should happen to the whole, not just to humanity, because I think it happens to the whole world. I think it is a global awakening, means an awakening of the world. That so the foundations are made. Otherwise, as T.S. Eliot said, we had the experience but missed the meaning. But how it is going to happen, I don't know. I thought it would be much simpler, and I thought there would be something in a way, the heart of every seeker that would respond.
But it's not just about the seeker, because if it's going to be a global consciousness, a global shift, it can't just be limited to the few who are serious spiritual practitioners. It has to be available to people who aren't so interested in spiritual life and aren't willing to devote, their life to that pursuit. Yeah,
you are right, and I think it can happen on all levels. I think on an ecological level, there is already a fundamental awareness that we are one living organism, this interdependent, interrelated ecological system. I think the internet is an example of on a communications level of oneness. I do think that traditionally spiritual practitioners, or those who have access to something that is not in this world, have a part to play. I think they are needed to, in a way, to be the pioneers of consciousness.
To be the stepping stones, you see, that you describe.
Yes, because I think this has always been their role in the past. If you go back to the foundations of Western civilization that came from Empedocles and Parmenides, you would see that they were mystics, and they brought through the understandings of rationalism that is the foundation of our Western culture from mystical experiences.
But just like then, as in now, they were dismissed and viewed as illogical and unnecessary.
They were dismissed later, but they still have created the foundations, and mystics don't expect to be understood.
Some people will use a symbolism of the relationship of God to the universe, wherein God is, say, brilliant light, only somehow veiled, hiding underneath all these forms that you see as you look around you. So far, so good. But the truth is funnier than that. It is that you are looking right at the brilliant light now, that the experience you are having, which you call ordinary everyday consciousness, pretending you're not it, that experience is exactly the same thing as it. There's no difference at all. And when you find that out, you laugh yourself silly. That's the great discovery. In other words, when you really start to see things, and you look at an old paper cup, and you go into the nature of what it is to see, what vision is, or what smell is, or what touch is, you realize that that vision of the paper cup is the brilliant light of the cosmos. Nothing could be brighter. 10,000 suns couldn't be brighter. Only they are hidden in the sense that all the points of the infinite light are so tiny when you see them in the cup. They don't blow your eyes out. But it is actually, see, the source of all light is in the eye. If there were no eyes in this world, the sun would not be light. You evoke light out of the universe. In the same way, you, by virtue of having a soft skin, evoke hardness out of wood. Wood is only hard in relation to a soft skin. It's your eardrum that evokes noise out of the air. You, by being this organism, call into being the whole universe of light and color and hardness and heaviness and everything, you see? Well, now here's the problem. If this is the state of affairs, which is so, and if the consciousness state you're in at this moment is the same thing as what we might call the divine state, if you do anything to make it different, it shows you don't understand that it's so. So the moment you start practicing yoga, or praying, or meditating, or indulging in some sort of spiritual cultivation, you are getting in your own way. If you think you have a problem, you see, that you're an ego and that you're in difficulty, the answer that the Zen master makes to you is, show me your ego. I want to see this thing that has a problem. See, because when you look for your own mind, that is to say your own particularized center of being, which is separate from everything else, you won't be able to find it. But the only way you'll know it isn't there is if you look for it hard enough to find out that it isn't there. And so everybody says, all right, know yourself, look within, find out who you are. Because the harder you look, you won't be able to find it. And then you'll realize that it isn't there at all. There isn't a separate you. Your mind is what there is. Everything.
Now I love appearing to talk to love, but it feels good. But love already knows my message. You already know exactly that you are complete, that you are pure love, it seems crazy to say to you that you have always been enough. You know, how do you tell pure unconditional love, that is beyond words? No, you have always been enough. You do not need to go on some path so that then you will be worthy of enlightenment or something like that. That's all the mind. The ego needs to be worthy, needs to be good enough or bad enough, as long as it's separate from what is. But how can it be separate from what is? You know, that's non-duality. There is not two. It never goes away. It's you can't escape the peace that you are. It's here. It's always here. It's always been here.
A storyteller never regrets the past that paints their books. A storyteller never forgets the path that gave them looks. You won't find it in the places you've been, or even the people you meet. The story is alchemy performed by your heart when you give it a reason to beat. Confusion becomes conviction. Hardship becomes romantic. Stress turns into pressure, and no lesson is found pedantic. Loss becomes abundance. Scars become proud. Broken grows character, and character grows loud. Weary becomes wise, and wisdom is meant to be shared. If you had known where this journey would lead you, then why would you ever be scared? It didn't happen long ago. It happened just now. Did you miss it? When alchemy is performed, the story changes in an instant.
So I'm gonna keep repeating myself and I'm gonna say it in different ways, but say the same thing, pointing to the same truth. Because that's my life's work. And I want you to know it because it brings me peace. It brings me peace knowing that all I need to do is just exist, to just be myself. It's peaceful. It's amazing. It opens you up to love when you're so empty in your consciousness. When you just exist, you're open to love. You're open to everything.
I work on myself as an offering to you. I serve you as a way of working on myself. And that double whammy, or that double investment, or that double process means that the more you serve, the emptier of identification you get when you're doing karma yoga properly, and the freer of identification with your own separateness you get, the more you're being fed. The more you're being fed, the more you can do and the more you want to do, and the more joy you're having from it.
It has to be, the omega point has to be something where you have a uniformity of people's awareness or their attention, and it just like converges into white light, infinity, and then boom.
You see the inevitability. How truth has integrity and is the only thing that can persist. Lies cannot persist. It's impossible. Like, I couldn't believe that it would be this beautiful.
Celestial event.
Of course not.
No.
The cocoon looks nothing like the butterfly.
Words. Describe poetry. They should have said the poem. So beautiful. Beautiful. So beautiful. So beautiful. I had no idea. I
I think the key question is, what is the universe supposed to be fine-tuned for? Now, you could think it's fine-tuned for human beings, and that was the implication of the word anthropic, but I think that's clearly far too anthropocentric. But, so is it fine-tuned for mice, for some minimum level of intelligence, or is it just fine-tuned for microbes, or is it just fine-tuned for the existence of just complexity in general, life in general? Now, we don't know for sure, but my own particular view is that really we should think of this fine-tuning as to be related to the presence of complexity in the universe. We know that over the history of the 14 billion years since the Big Bang, there has evolved in the universe a hierarchy of complexity. First we have various elements are produced, and then we know we've got planets, and we've got galaxies and stars and planets, and then eventually living cells, and then evolution culminating in beings like us, and even brains and consciousness. Well, I think you can see this as just a process of building up what I call a pyramid of complexity. But what isn't always appreciated is that this pyramid of complexity only arises because of all these fine-tunings, which have been called the anthropic fine-tunings. And so from that point of view, you could say, well, actually, it's rather incidental what the fine-tuning is for. Our minds are just a sort of incidental byproduct of this complexity. The universe could just as well be designed for television sets or something like that. So that's one perspective. But I have to say that another part of me thinks that actually consciousness probably is crucial to the anthropic principle. I shouldn't say to the anthropic principle, to the tunings. And the reason I say that is because I think there are independent reasons for believing that mind is in some sense a fundamental rather than an incidental feature of the universe. And so my personal bias is that really the fine-tuning really is to do with the presence of consciousness.
Maybe this is where we can touch on spiral dynamics. I'll give just a brief overview, and you can add anything you like. Spiral dynamics is, from my understanding, it was made by this guy, Claire Graves, and it was his, based on studies of a lot of different people and what they understood about their developmental psychology at different periods in their life. And it also tracked sort of almost with an upper limit that few people exceeded in any given time period with where a society was at a certain stage. So you might say that earlier stages were very tribalistic and warlike, then you enter into this medieval, listen to the church dogmatism, you evolve into this capitalist individualism, into what you might call more socialist, care about everyone in the environment, and then beyond into things that I really can't describe because they don't exist in governments. They exist mostly in people, which is stage yellow and stage turquoise. And all of these stages are color-coded. So that's spiral dynamics. Is there anything you want to add to that before we sort of talk about it?
Yeah, it was based on the works of Claire Graves, but also popularized by Don Beck and Christopher Cohen, so they deserve some credit for that. They're academics who actually wrote the spiral dynamics book and trademarked that name. But yeah, it's based on the works of Claire Graves. But yeah, that's a good summary. Basically, what I would add to that is that it turns out that when you start to study the value systems of humans across the world, which Claire Graves did in like the 60s, 1960s, he was sort of shocked to discover that there's a certain consistent progression and order to these different value systems. And there's not that many different value systems, and this is not just something that's part of Western culture, really it applies around the entire world. And so he developed this developmental psychological model where you can actually track and see how one's cognitive development or moral development or spiritual development evolves over time and becomes more sophisticated and complex, and better able to deal with the complexities of our evolving society and culture. And so he mapped that out, and then the spiral dynamics guys, they color-coded it and called it spiral dynamics. And so we have these different stages. These stages are sort of, you might think of them as evolutions of the human psyche. The human psyche becomes more refined and nuanced in order to deal with more complexity.
Well, novelty is not necessarily good or nice. Novelty is complex. That's what it is. And so I see really a concatenation of tendencies and forces here at the end. It's only going to get weirder. The level of contradiction is going to rise excruciatingly, even beyond the excruciating present levels of contradiction. So I think it's just going to get weirder and weirder and weirder, and finally it's going to be so weird that people are going to have to talk about how weird it is. And at that point, novelty theory can come out of the woods, because eventually people are going to say, what the hell is going on? It's just too nuts. It's not enough to say it's nuts. You have to explain why it's so nuts. So between now and 2012, the next 14 years, I look for the invention of artificial life, the cloning of human beings, possible contact with extraterrestrials, possible human immortality, and at the same time, appalling acts of brutality, genocide, race baiting, homophobia, famine, starvation, because the systems which are in place to keep the world sane are utterly inadequate to the forces that have been unleashed. Because what they see going on is the breakdown of all tradition, all order, all sanctioned norms of behavior. And they're quite right that it's happening, but they're quite wrong to conclude that it should be resisted or is somehow evil. The mushroom said to me once, it said, this is what it's like when a species prepares to depart for the stars. You don't depart for the stars under calm and orderly conditions. It's a fire in a madhouse. And that's what we have, the fire in the madhouse at the end of time. This is what it's like when a species prepares to move on to the next dimension. The entire destiny of all life on the planet is tied up in this. We are not acting for ourselves or from ourselves. We happen to be the point species on a transformation that will affect every living organism on this planet at its conclusion.
The miracle of the concrescence. That's why I'm so keen on boundary dissolution. The more boundaries that have dissolved, the closer to concrescence we are. And when you finally reach it, there are no boundaries. You are eternity. You are all space and time. You are alive and dead, here and there, before and after. The singularity is a coincidentia oppositorum. It can simultaneously coexist in states which are contradictory. It's something which transcends rational apprehension, but it gives the universe meaning, because all process then can be seen to be a seeking and a moving and an effort to approximate, connect with, and attend to this transcendental object at the end of time.
You are actually feeling a force that stretches throughout the universe and goes all the way back to the Big Bang. Whether you call it anything from eros to self-organization through self-transcendence, it is love, just love. And love, by any other name, is simply the drive to ever higher levels of unity.
At the basis of all life's diversity, there is unity. At our basis, you and I are one. And that unity, at the basis of mind and matter, is consciousness, universal consciousness. So with that deep understanding that consciousness isn't created by the brain, it's not purely an outcome of molecular chemical processes in the brain, but is fundamental in nature. It's the very core of nature. We call it the unified field. Now that we have that foundational understanding of what consciousness is, we can solve the mind-body problem. We can see how consciousness percolates up through our physiology to become the consciousness that we experience and see and sensory perception and all of that. I'm going to show you very quickly some of the early research. This is the first study, and I won't go into it in great detail except to say that this experiment was performed in the Middle East during the peak of the Lebanon War in the early 1980s. It was hypothesized, based on many previous smaller experiments, that if enough people were collectively experiencing and stimulating this fundamental, powerful field of peace within, that there would be a radiated influence of peace that would affect the behavior of people throughout society. People would wake up in the morning and they'd decide, hey, I don't think I'm going to kill anybody today. What a novel thought. That, with some expanded comprehension and less narrowly cramped, narrowly self-centered, acutely stressed vision, that those desperate acts of terrorism simply don't really have a fertile field to fall on. So this chart shows a dotted line going up and down, which is the rise and fall on a daily basis of the number of people who were meditating as a group in Jerusalem. About 1,000 people on average, sometimes more, sometimes less. And the solid line represents progress towards peace in the war in neighboring Lebanon. And even before the benefit of statistical analysis, you can almost see from the raw data that progress towards peace, measured by reduced war deaths, reduced war injuries, reduced number of bombs, that progress towards peace goes up and down almost in lockstep with the number of people who were meditating as a group, radiating this influence of inner peace to become outer peace. When this was subject to mathematical analysis, the likelihood that this is simply due to some fluke, due to chance, is less than 1 part in 10,000 to be able to say something with this certainty that group meditation prevented war. That is a really remarkable finding. When this was published in the Yale University Journal of Conflict Resolution, it ignited a firestorm. First of all, it took 2 years to publish the paper because the editors reviewed it and reviewed it and reviewed it, and they said in the end, this paper is unassailable. This paper was performed at a standard of scientific rigor far beyond that required for publication in any journal. So they had to publish it, but they published it with a letter. And the letter in the journal said, the results of this experiment are so unexpected that 1,000 people could influence the behavior of 1,000,000, that they urged other scientists to go out and repeat the study. And that's exactly what happened over the next 2.25 years. 7 other scientific collaborations went out and repeated the study, training and assembling groups of meditators, practicing transcendental meditation. And in every one of these experiments during this 2.25 year period, there was a marked reduction in violence and war. 80% drop in war deaths and war-related injuries in comparison to all the other days during the 2.25 years where there were no meditating groups, when the situation grew slightly worse, as this chart shows, in comparison to 7 highly positive bars showing highly statistically significant progress towards peace in every single experiment. If you put these together, the likelihood that this reduction of war was again simply due to chance and not due to the meditating groups was less than 1 part in 10 million. There is far more evidence that group meditation can turn off war like a light switch than there is evidence that aspirin reduces headache pain. for example. It is a scientific fact.
This is a periodic table of elements, 118 elements. All of them form chemistry except for one group. There's a group on the end called the noble gases. All the other atoms in the periodic table create chemistry, the noble gases don't. Why? Because they have something that they can inform us about, something that's so critical, and it works like this. Every atom has an equal number of positive and negative charges, meaning for every electron that's negative, there's a positive proton, so all atoms are neutral. They're all neutral. But the charges are not equally distributed. So my atom illustrated on the board here has an electron on the right side, but there's no balance on the other side. So there's more negative on the right side than on the left side. The point about it is this: all atoms spin. They're like nanotornadoes. But if the charges are not equally distributed, then that means as they spin, they wobble. So here are three atoms. A noble gas, argon, the outer shell is completely filled, so this means that all the slots in the outer shell are completely taken. There's no slack. I have here a potassium ion. It's got 1 electron in its outer shell, but it needs 8, so it's missing 7 electrons. So it's not in balance. It's got an extra electron on the side. Chlorine is missing an electron from its balance. It could take 1 electron and add balance, but it's missing 1. So potassium and chlorine are not in balance. Noble gas is. Now watch what happens. They all spin, so watch what happens as they spin. The potassium and the chlorine wobble. Look at the argon. It spins in perfect balance. And when we're watching these, we see these wobbly ones come together, but guess what they do? They create a bond and share the 1 electron. Now they're both spinning in balance, and I go, wow, that's a great relationship, except for the fact it's called codependency. Argon is in self-love, agape love. Why? It spins in perfect balance. Here's the point. Where does the wobble come from? Not being in balance. Where do we as atoms get wobble? Our programming throws us out of balance. If our programming is not fully supportive, we wobble. Why is that important? Because we're always seeking a mate. If you're wobbling, what kind of mate will you seek? Think about it for a fraction of a second. You're going to find somebody who's out of balance, because 2 out of balance ones comes together and they can create balance. You go, oh my God, that's so great. We're balanced finally. And I go, no, you're still in codependency. Why? Because potassium can say, screw you, I'm going out and fooling around. You need me. Oh, don't go I need you. That's codependency. And I go, yeah, but noble gases spin in perfect balance. They don't make chemistry. And you go, oh, well, geez, they have perfect balance, but they don't create relationships. And I go, that's what I thought until I understood something. That noble gases can be hit by a photon of light. And when they get hit by a photon of light, they become enlightened noble gases. They're not only are they in balance, but they're enlightened. And I go, why is that relevant? And the answer is this: because when a noble gas gets enlightened, it will seek another noble gas to make a partnership. That other partnership, they come together. I love the name. A partnership of noble gases is called an excitomer, because they're both excited. And what happens when 2 noble gases come together because one of them got hit by a photon of light? They give off laser light. That's where lasers come from, noble gases. And why is that relevant? And the answer is simply this: if we become balanced and we rewrite those programs in the subconscious mind, when we become balanced and start to spin that way, and then we become excited, then we find other people who are in balance and we start to spin with them, and we make relationships and we give off laser light and light up this world. The light we're looking for that this planet needs is us. We just are out of balance. So, I've run out of time. These are excerpts out of the book. I wish I could have stayed here longer because there's a checklist. Oh, checklist. Oh, can't show it to you now. Forget it. Okay. But there's a checklist to find out how to create this happily married situation. And when you create this happily married situation, I can assure you of one thing that you've only touched, that heaven on earth is a reality. It's here for you every day of your life. Every day you can wake up in the juicy love and share it and spread it, because the light you're going to give off is going to ignite others. Because when you give off a photon of light, other noble gases will pick it up and they'll become excitomers. And that is our destination. We must let go of the vision that this is hell in any sense of the way, because it's only a programming that did that. Because we were given the gift to be in love and have a honeymoon and live in heaven, and you've touched it, and that's why it's so important. It's nothing that is just an idea in your head. You've actually done it. Now you can make it a way of life, and that's what we need, because we're looking to bring back the light to this planet, and you are it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Taking refuge in the Sangha is a very strong and important practice. The most important thing we have to do is to allow the energy of the Sangha to penetrate us. We have to surrender to the Sangha. We should not resist. There is a term, a lovely term, that is the Sangha Kaya, the Sangha body. We learn how to take the community as our own body. My body is not just this. My body is the whole Sangha. And we practice in order to see that our brothers and our sisters are also part of our body. And if you learn how to do it, the effect, the result will be tremendous, because you are greatly supported and you can get out of your individual self in a very easy way. Allow yourself to be carried by the Sangha. Like a drop of water, allow herself to be carried by the river.
Do you realize?
Well, tell me. Well, I couldn't possibly tell you. It's here. Can't you feel it?
Beautiful face. Do you realize?
Bob, keep on talking to the people. They might never hear your voice again. Keep on talking to them for a little while until you're cool, man.
Well, it's the people have a voice inside of them that talk to them, you know. That is the voice that these people must listen to.
Even if nobody else knows, if it is held in consciousness in this world, it is present. It is one of the simple spiritual truths. If you don't have to tell anybody what you know, if you just hold it in your consciousness, it is known. There is this substance in life called love. And it is the greatest power in the universe, and it can move mountains and it can move hearts. And mostly it is veiled from humanity. But we are the guardians of the secrets of love. And
love has never been a popular movement, and no one's ever wanted really to be free. The world is held together, really it is held together, by the love and the passion of very few people.
Good things last, you realize.
Otherwise, of course, you can despair. Walk down the street of any city, any afternoon, and look around you. What you got to remember is what you're looking at is also you. Everyone you're looking at is also you.
You can't go on anyone else's trip. You can only go on your own trip. Until you find out it's all our trip, and when we get home, we all get back with great tales of trips, except we all took the trip together. Just be here. Don't judge, don't try, don't stop, don't start, just be here. It's all just enough.
That happiness,
it's enough to know that I love you.
Do you realize that everyone you know someday will die? And instead of saying all of your goodbyes, let them know you realize that life goes fast. It's hard to make the good things last. You realize the sun doesn't go down. It's just an illusion caught